Okay, this is a video for the Virtual Apprenticeship Challenge in which I want to talk about axe work. So here you can see my axe. It's fairly heavy axe. It's Granfersbrook's large Swedish carving axe, and it is sharp but not excessively sharp. I'm not going to hurt myself by pressing my finger on this. What I want is for it to bite in consistently. But what I found is that if it's too sharp, then it sticks a little bit at the bottom of each cut, which means I have to tug it to come out, and that throws off my next cut. So if it's a little on the blunter side, then it pops out of the cut really easily. Now, the second thing you'll notice is that most of the axe work is coming from waggling my wrist. That saves a lot of wear and tear on my arm and shoulders. And guys, I can't see anything, so I'm doing this blind. I'm just going to talk a bunch. If you have questions afterwards, shoot me questions in my DM, because I'm not going to be able to see them here. So I'm waggling from my wrist, and that saves a lot of wear and tear on my arms. One of the things I like about this heavier axe is that the weight of the axe actually does a lot of the work, whereas with a lighter axe, which I don't have here, my arm is doing the work. And so I actually am more tired and more worn out after using a lighter axe than when using this heavier axe here. You'll notice that I'm choked up so that I'm about an inch away from the head. Sometimes when I'm working a little further down, I'll hold it about here, but I basically never hold it here. Here, you have very little control, and there's, basically the only time I hold it there is when I do that. You'll also notice that my axe lives in the stump. It is either in my hand being used, or it's firmly in the stump, so much so that I could actually pick up the stump with that. You'll see a lot of carvers, in fact most carvers, leave their axes on the stump like this. Problem is that all it takes is bumping that with your leg and it falls off on your foot, and then all of a sudden you're in the hospital with a severed tendon in your foot. So always sink your axe when you're not using it. That's an important safety consideration. My stump, likewise, is different than most people's stumps because it's a softwood stump. It's got some gnarly branches coming out of it here, and that keeps it from splitting apart. But it does get this lovely pitting, hollowing to it, and that's really important for safety because when I'm carving, I usually have a piece of wood and it's braced at an angle. Now, if this was your average oak stump that's perfectly smooth on top, all of a sudden I have to be working straight up and down all the time, or it's going to slip out from under me, and then my hand comes under the axe at an unexpected moment as the axe is coming down. So by having a nice pitted surface, I make it so I can work at an angle, and that's going to really come into play later. That's going to be super important. So, like I said earlier, guys, I can't see a bloody thing, so send your questions to my DM afterwards. What you're going to find is that even if you have a smooth stump, you want to chop up the surface a bit and rough it up. Whether you do that with an axe or with a chainsaw, you want it to be rough so that you can drive a corner in like this and then hold it off to the side. My stump is up on legs. It's probably about waist height. I use the wood chips I'm standing on. No, it's not waist height. Top of my stump is right here, mid-thigh height. And that allows me to work on longer billets as well as shorter ones. Shorter ones, obviously, I'm bending over a little bit, but I do so many long spoons that it's helpful to have it be up high like this. So, and it's up on legs, so it's just 3 legs, 1.25" spade bit, maybe 1.5". I do it with a cordless drill, and it takes 2 fresh batteries to get it, and you want to angle it further than you think you want to, because your enemy is if your legs of your stump are not splayed far enough, then your stump is tippy. You're doing a lot of sort of sideways pressure with this billet here, and so I actually also I oriented it in such a way that one of the legs is basically opposite the direction that I'm most often pressing into. So I'm essentially pressing into a leg. And what else? I've got a club here. That's super important. This is made out of a spot where 2 branches come out. It lasts much longer that way. This one's actually lasted me almost a year now. So it's a champion club. Well, maybe a little bit less than a year. And I have a couple tables here to help keep things organized. Now, I like to work with pieces of wood that are longer than I need. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to stay back from my fingers. I find this cut that you see a lot of people do where they go on the side like this super awkward and not helpful. And I'd much rather do it right from the start like this and have that couple of inches of safety between where the axe is and where my fingers are. And you'll notice that I'm not gripping it like this. I'm gripping it with my thumb, base of my thumb pressed there, and this pressed down. Now also notice how it's tipped slightly this way and it's tipped slightly this way. And what that does is it puts it in line. I want my billet to be angled such that the axe, I'm not doing anything funny with my wrist. All I'm doing is, if you were to bring up your axe without a billet and kind of go like this, that's the angle you want to hold the billet at, so that you're not doing anything funny with your arm when you're working with the axe. You want it to be in as neutral and easy a position as possible. And what else? Notice also that I'm standing to one side of where my axe would go, so that if this swings through, it's not going to land into my thigh, but I'm turned slightly sideways to the work as I do it. You want to be really respectful of the axe, because this is where you can really mess up your body super quick. Likewise, when you're using a new axe, or if you're just unfamiliar with your tool, if you want it to hit, say here, you're going to watch me hit it the very first time. But if you're unfamiliar with where it's going to hit, you want to start low and walk your way up to where you want to be, and then keep hitting that same spot, that same crease in the wood, and chase that cut down. But you don't ever want to try and hit it right off the bat, because chances are you're going to mess it up and get up close to your finger, and you only got one set of fingers on each hand, so preserve them. So just like an archer getting his range by shooting an arrow, seeing how far it goes with a certain draw, you're going to start low, get your range, walk your way up, and then chase your way down. And what I do for the beginning of each spoon is what I call the reference face. And what the reference face does is it establishes the top plane of the spoon and creates the crank. So this is my moment to figure out how much angle I want there to be between the handle of the spoon and the top rim of the bowl. I don't have to get it exactly perfect, but for instance, if I want very little, then I establish very little. If I want a lot, I establish a lot. Most spoons fall sort of within an average range, for me, about like that. And you can see this here is the bottom spot, and then here and here. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that I have enough width for the shape I want to do, and that within that width that I'm going to need, I have enough depth. So you can see over here, there's very little depth because of the shape of this wood. So thankfully, what I'm trying to do is a kid's spoon, which is quite narrow, and I have enough depth. So one of the nice things about doing a reference face like this is that you can immediately see, without putting any more than a minute of your time, if that particular piece of wood is going to work for the type of spoon that you want to carve. So very quickly you can suss out if it's going to work out or not, and that allows me both to abandon things quickly that aren't going to work out, but also to utilize pieces of wood that otherwise wouldn't get utilized. For anyone watching who hasn't seen this or haven't heard me say it, I can't see any of your comments, so there's too much glare. So shoot me comments in the DM. Okay, so once I have this reference face, and I know I can see that the shape I want is going to fit within the wood underneath here, then I draw my shape onto it. Now here's an important distinction. If this is the bottom right here, what I want to avoid is lining up I'm going to exaggerate the size of the spoon. This is not going to be the size of the spoon that I'm going to do. What I don't want to do is, it's hard to make myself draw it this way. What I don't want to do is line up the widest part of my spoon with that bottom part there. Okay? No, don't do that. Instead, I'm just going to dress this up real quick so we get a little bit. What we want to do instead is put the widest part of the spoon bowl above that deepest part. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it super easy to carve that top rim. If you've ever carved a spoon and you got stuck on the top rim and you thought to yourself, God, I'm going back and forth and back and forth, what you want to do is, if this is your deepest part right here, you want to put your widest part, which is proportional to whatever size the bowl is, but you want to put your widest part up here. And then your neck like here, and the tip of the bowl there, say. Okay, so now I'm going to draw this kid spoon in here, and you can see how that plays out, and then we'll discuss why that works so well. So, here's my kid spoon. By putting the widest part up above here, where the grain changes, right? I'm carving in this direction, and then here, the grain flows such that I don't want to be carving in that direction. But when I'm carving this top rim and I get to here, where normally I would get stuck in that other orientation, I can just tip the knife a little bit, and all of a sudden I'm going downhill this way. You can see how that's downhill through the grain also. So I'm able to carve the rim in one go, all the way from the tip down to the neck in one go, and that's super important. With the other way, you get stuck here, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to clean up that bit of the rim, but because the grain change is happening there, you get stuck and your rim goes deeper than you intended it to. So notice that I'm drawing a pretty sketchy shape. You have to be able to visualize the finished size and then sketch a shape that's larger than that, because you need some material to remove. So one of the things I like to do is draw a center line to my spoon. And then I extend that center line, and by holding the billet like this, I'm foreshortening my perspective. You can actually see how it's pretty easy to tell if something is straight or not when you foreshorten the perspective, because you're looking down it and everything is apparent. Whereas if you hold it like this, your eye has a much harder time telling if something is straight or not. So I foreshorten the perspective, and then I draw the end of the handle, and then I do each side of the handle to that center line. And this allows me to adjust the length of the handle if I want to. Notice how sketchy my spoon outline is. That's deliberate. That's to give me room, wiggle room to adjust later on. Now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, yeah, I don't want the handle quite that long. Not that long. So now I can see that it's going to fit in the wood underneath here. I can see that I've oriented it correctly in the billet here. This is on the short side, and then this is on the long side. Now how much axing you need to do here and here is dictated by how big of a spoon you want to fit. Obviously you need to do enough to be able to fit your spoon down in here. But also look at how little crank I axed in here. You can always exaggerate that crank so long as you leave some thickness to the edge as you're axing it out. You can then exaggerate the crank more. You don't need to get the crank just right here. In fact, it's harder to reduce the amount of crank than it is to increase the amount of crank. So I always err on the side of doing less crank and then giving myself room to adjust it later. Now, I like to saw using my axe as a pivot stop. And then my hand goes here, and then I saw right across the tip of the spoon. I don't know if you're even able to see me. It might be off the side of the thing. And I find it helpful to keep picking up the pieces of wood. I burn them in my wood stove. But if you don't, you form this sort of carpet of wood chunks that you can stand on, but it very quickly you're standing up really high and bending over your stump super low. Okay, so now I do a stop cut, and I'm going to do a stop cut on either side of the spoon. And here's, again, always sink your axe. Here's where I do my stop cuts. Here and here. Notice that those stop cuts are down from the neck itself, because you need to leave something for your axe to remove. If you do the stop cuts right up here at the neck, then by the time you're trying to axe that, you have to be so precise with your axe, guaranteed you're going to mess up at least one of them and axe into the bowl that you want to keep. So keep your stop cuts further back. It's not going to be a problem to axe around the shoulder. They're just going to pop free. So now I'm going to do my stop cuts. And for my stop cuts, I want to go right up to the line. Admittedly, it's a sketchy line, but I want to go right up to the line that I drew. And then this is super helpful on this saw. It has two things. One here, and then one, I think this is for pruners to be able to prune the underside of a branch. But it's super helpful here because it helps keep the blade straight up and down, which means I'm less prone to overcutting on the underside than with saws that don't have this feature. This is a Silky Excel 21. I've tried a bunch of saws, and this is my favorite. All right, now I'm going to trim the end of the handle. I'm trimming right up to the line because while you can axe across cross grain with a good sharp axe, it can really stress out the wood, and you'll end up stressing the grain of the wood right in a spot that you want to be strong and not delicate. So if you have lined up your handle with the grain well, and if your handle has enough flare and is tapered enough down to here, and a couple of other factors just in terms of how the grain flow is, you can sometimes get away with doing this. And you can see how much time I save myself by not having to axe down the side of that. Is this risky? Yeah, it's probably a little bit risky. One thing to bear in mind is that when you split a piece of wood, it's always going to split and run out towards the narrow side. So if I were splitting this piece of wood here, for instance, it would definitely run out to here, even if the grain wasn't going to do it, just because it always runs towards the side with less mass. So instead, I'm going to put it here. It looks like there's enough mass here. Get rid of it. I'm going to check how far my stop cut went in the back, where I am in the front. Good. And notice that I'm using the club for this. But I'm not giving it a super hard whack because you don't want to go straight down through and bust out the shoulder. Now, even in a situation like this, where it still ran out to the side and you still have to do a little bit more, it's worth doing. And here's why. The reason it's worth doing is because you have now successfully gotten away from this little part here, which means that you can use the axe without having to go close to your fingers. So one good rule of the axe is to never let the edge of the axe come up over your hand. And obviously, if I was trying to axe right here at the very end, I would come up over my hand. Notice how delicate I'm being here. What I'm looking to do is you can feel when it's about to pop free. And the trick is to stop yourself from doing a big whack right on the one where it's going to pop free. And instead, be very delicate. Alright, I'm going to trim down the sides. And you see how the grain is sort of flowing around the side here? So I'm going to actually start at the widest point and just do that. And leave this part thicker up here. It just doesn't matter. Now, I've got a lot of thickness here, and my life is going to be easier when it comes to rounding everything if I just reduce the back of the bowl here. So from the bottom of what is the crank, I want to essentially try and create a nice curved underside of the spoon. Your average spoon only takes a thin sliver of wood, but it is possible to lose too much material right here in the center of the back, and then you won't be able to get a nice rounded bowl. So beware of going too thin right there. And then I'm going to flip it around and reduce the weight on the back of the handle. Notice how gentle I'm being with the axe. Very gentle, very deliberate. There's nothing fast about what I'm doing here. Again, you got one set of fingers. Okay, now I've got roughly the curvature I want on the underside. And so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna knock off the corners. But when I knock off the corners, I want to make sure I preserve some of this section here that's at 90 degrees. So I'm only gonna knock off this, essentially this piece right here. Dad, I'm doing a live thing.
I know.
So don't come in. Okay, so I'm gonna knock off the corners here, and I just do that by placing the axe and then go like that. And now I'm gonna extend that forward, and then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. And notice that I'm being careful to preserve some thickness to that rim here, so that what that rim thickness does is it allows me to change the curvature of the rim from the top without changing the way it looks from the front. So now, very gently, I'm just going to use the axe, and the axe is going to keep doing the same little thing, and I'm going to move the piece of wood underneath it. That's how you get a curve, is by moving the piece, rotating it down as the axe does the same thing. You're not holding the piece still and trying to move the axe. That's way too hard. Instead, let the axe do something consistent and you move the piece underneath it. You'll also notice that I'm not trying too hard to get the tip super curved because it's fairly easy. The weight of my axe, I think, is 2 pounds. Guys, I actually can't see comments at all. So, I'm sorry. Send me questions in the DM. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. I don't bother rounding the tip hardly at all. I just want to make it fairly easy to do with the knife. So you can see at about that thickness, that's pretty easy to do with the knife. That's not going to be a problem. So there's really no point in going further than that. Now I'm going to reduce the weight in the handle. Don't overdo reducing the handle, because depending on the type of spoon and depending on what kind of cross section you want the handle to have, if you reduce it too much, you limit your options. So if you want to try doing a diamond handle or an oval handle or any cross section other than a rectangle, don't go carried away with the rectangle making it too thin. And then I just want to very gently, what I'm doing here is just trying to get in on this material here. I don't want to do too much because it just gets hard from this angle, but you do what you can. And then a little bit from this angle. Notice how slow my axe work is. It's tap, 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 tap. It's not tap, 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 tap. And then to get this bit right here, I don't have any fancy notches in my stump. I just use the edge of the stump, hold it in place, tap, tap, tap. And remember how I said it would pop out? See how that popped out? Just like that. So now, I do the other side. And come down just like this. Good. And you can dress up the sides as much as you want, but honestly, on a little tiny spoon like this, that's 2 minutes with the knife. We'll do the same thing with almost no risk. So that's my spoon there. If there is a twist to it, which it looks like this one doesn't have much, you have two options. One is you could pretend that the rim was perfect, and that would mean that you'd have to completely change all 4 sides, which you're doing some of that anyways when you're carving it, so that's not a big deal. Or you could pretend that the handle was perfect, in which case it usually just means that you need to lower the tip of one rim, and that gets rid of the twist. I always pop my spoons, my blanks, into a plastic bag to preserve their moisture. But, for instance, here is a bubble scoop blank that I'm about to carve that was quite wet, so I actually left it out so it would start drying. And and now it feels much drier, and will probably dry the rest of the way as I carve it. That's it, guys. If you got this far, this is, I do these videos for the Virtual Apprenticeship Challenge. It's a month-long course. You might have seen my most recent post. The future of the Virtual Apprenticeship Challenge and these sorts of videos and me putting this amount of effort into providing resources for you guys is kind of up in the air. Not enough people are signing up for it to be worth it for me to do it. So March might be, this upcoming March one might be the last chance you get to do it. I might not do them anymore. So if you're interested, let me know. There's information on my website about how much it costs and what it entails. Thanks so much. Bye.